Imagine a world where a beautiful orphan is forced to marry a poor woodcutter because she is seen as a curse. But what if that poor man unknowingly holds a secret that could change everything? Discover the tale of Zuri, a story of pain, surprise, and a twist that turns the tables on those who wronged her. Kwame did not know who he truly was. He had lived his whole life thinking he was just another man, struggling to survive in a world that had never been kind to him. To those around him, he was just another villager, a face among many, working hard to make ends meet. But beyond the simple life he knew, whispers of a lost heir echoed through the kingdom, an heir hidden away to protect him from death. The elders believed the rightful king was still out there somewhere, but no one knew who he was. No one knew it was Kwame. Many years ago, the throne belonged to his father, a just and noble ruler chosen by the gods themselves. The proof of this divine choice was the glowing mark that appeared on his shoulder from birth, a mark that had been passed down through generations to those destined to rule. It was not just a birthmark, it was a symbol of divine favor, a light that set apart the chosen from the ordinary. The people revered it, and the elders swore by it. A ruler with the mark was a ruler blessed, and as long as the mark-bearer sat on the throne, prosperity followed. But not everyone saw it as a blessing. Kwame's uncle, the current king, had always wanted power. He was the younger brother, the shadow beside the light. He grew up in the same palace, wore the same fine robes, and learned the same royal lessons, but none of it mattered. The gods had not chosen him. Instead, they had chosen his older brother, the one with the glowing mark. This filled him with anger and jealousy, emotions that festered within him like an untreated wound. Why should his brother be the chosen one while he was overlooked? He was just as skilled with the sword, just as wise in counsel. Was his brother truly better than him, or was it just fate's cruel joke? Every time he looked at his brother, he saw what he was denied. Every time the elders bowed before the mark, it was a reminder that he would always be second, a mere spectator to his brother's greatness. He convinced himself that the gods had made a mistake. That mark meant nothing. A birthmark should not determine destiny. Strength should. Wisdom should. He was stronger, more ambitious, more willing to do what needed to be done. And if the gods would not see it, then he would make them see it. He knew there was only one way he could ever sit on the throne. The mark-bearer had to disappear. Not just his brother, but any future child who carried that cursed glow. Kwame's father, the rightful king, had fallen ill, a slow, wasting sickness that no healer could understand, let alone cure. The kingdom prayed for his recovery, but his brother did not. The jealous brother saw this as his moment. He had spent years living in his brother's shadow, waiting for a chance to take what he had always believed should have been his. But waiting was no longer an option. Fate moved too slowly, and he had no patience left. He needed the throne now. Yet, there was one obstacle he could not ignore: Kwame's mother. She was pregnant, and her child could change everything. If she gave birth to a son with a glowing mark, the royal elders would never allow another to rule. The gods would have spoken, and their will could not be denied. The baby would be the rightful king, the living proof that his uncle was nothing more than a pretender. The jealous brother could not allow that to happen. He watched closely, his mind filled with dark plans. He did not yet know what the gods had planned for the unborn child, but he knew one thing: if the baby was born with a mark, he would not live long enough to claim his destiny. One way or another, the throne would be his. The kingdom was cloaked in sorrow when Kwame's mother passed away. Her death was not just a tragedy, it was a final blow to a house already crumbling. The sickness that had drained the king's strength had also weighed on her heart. She had fought desperately to stay alive for her unborn child, but the gods had not shown mercy. The labor was long and difficult, and when her son's first cries filled the air, her own breath faded into silence. The palace mourned. People wept, but none grieved more than the dying king himself. When he saw his newborn son, a storm of emotions raged within him: joy, sorrow, and above all fear. The boy was perfect, untouched by the suffering that had stolen his mother away. And on his tiny shoulder, glowing softly in the dim candlelight, was the mark, the sign of the chosen one, the undeniable proof of his divine right to rule. But the king knew his brother too well. The man who had spent years coveting the throne would never let this child live. Not if he had anything to do with it. The king had little time left. He could feel the life slipping from his bones, the weight of his years and illness pressing down on him. His brother's ambition was like a storm on the horizon, dark and inevitable. There was only one way to save his newborn son, by ensuring that not even his most trusted allies knew where he was. With a heavy heart, he turned to the old woman who had helped deliver the child. She was wise, careful, and invisible in the palace, a figure no one would suspect of carrying the kingdom's greatest secret. He placed the infant in her arms, his weak fingers lingering on the child's soft cheek for a moment. "Take him away," he whispered. "No one must know where. Not even those who have sworn loyalty to me." The old woman's eyes were filled with sorrow, but she nodded. She understood the weight of what was being asked of her. Without another word, she wrapped the baby in a simple cloth and disappeared into the night. Only then did the king summon his most trusted warriors. They were men who had fought beside him for years, men who would have died to protect him. He looked at each of them with a steady gaze, his voice weak but firm. "My son lives," he said, "and the day will come when he must reclaim what is his." The warriors straightened, their loyalty unwavering. "You will protect him," the king continued, his breath ragged. "You will keep watch for him, but you will not know where he is. That knowledge has been hidden even from you, for his safety." Though confused, the warriors did not question their king's wisdom. They swore their oaths, vowing to stand guard over the kingdom until the rightful heir returned. By dawn the child had vanished, and by nightfall the rightful king was dead. The new king had achieved his goal, yet an uneasy shadow followed him everywhere. He had won the throne, but had he truly won? The child had been born. He knew that much. Was he even born with the royal birthmark? Had he died? No one had seen a body. No one had wept over a tiny grave. There was no proof that the last mark-bearer had truly perished. That uncertainty gnawed at him like a slow poison. He knew that if the boy was alive, he was a threat. As long as the true heir walked the earth, the throne could still be ripped from his grasp. And so he made a vow, one that he carried in his heart every waking moment. If the boy was alive, he would find him. And when he did, he would end him. The kingdom remained silent on the matter, but in the depths of their hearts, some still believed. The whispers never died, only softened with time. Some elders still hoped. Some warriors still watched. And some villagers still wondered if the gods had truly abandoned them. The reign of Kwame's uncle was one of cruelty and greed. He ruled with an iron fist, forcing his people to toil endlessly while he and his family lived in unimaginable luxury. The palace overflowed with riches, while the common folk struggled to survive. Hunger, fear, and suffering became their daily companions, yet no one dared to rebel. His wrath was swift, and his punishments were severe. Among the few the king trusted was Chief Issa, a ruthless man who had built his wealth by oppressing the weak. Where others saw suffering, he saw opportunity. It was no surprise, then, that the king approved of a marriage alliance between his son, the prince, and Chief Issa's daughter. Their union would strengthen the grip of tyranny over the land. As the wedding date approached, the king decided to pay Chief Issa's family a visit, a rare occurrence, for he seldom left his palace unless it was to assert his dominance. The news of his visit sent the chief's household into a frenzy. Everything had to be perfect. No effort was spared. Chief Issa, his wife, and their daughter were eager to host the most powerful man in the land. In preparation for the royal visit, extra hands were needed, and so Kwame and his wife Zuri were called upon to help with the endless chores. They had little choice but to obey. The king arrived with a grand entourage, and Chief Issa welcomed him with the highest honor. The feast was lavish, the conversations filled with flattery and laughter. Yet, as the evening unfolded, the king's attention drifted. From across the courtyard, he watched a young man move swiftly, carrying out chores with quiet efficiency. There was something about the way he walked, the way he carried himself. A vague familiarity tugged at the edges of the king's mind, like a long-forgotten memory struggling to resurface. Chief Issa noticed his gaze and turned to see what had caught his interest. "That's Kwame," the chief said, his voice laced with disdain. "The boy who let thieves escape with my cattle." The king's eyes narrowed. "I trust he has paid for his failure." "He is too poor and wretched to repay even half of what was lost," Chief Issa scoffed. "So I punished him in another way. I married off that unfortunate, cursed girl to him." The king raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A cursed girl." Just as Chief Issa was about to explain further, a sharp voice rang through the courtyard. "You call that sweeping? Are you trying to embarrass us in front of the king?" The king turned his head slightly, his gaze following the commotion. Nia stood at the entrance of the courtyard, her hands on her hips, her face twisted in disgust as she glared at a young woman struggling to carry a heavy basket of yams. It was Zuri. She bowed her head slightly, her hands trembling under the weight of the basket. "I'm doing my best, my lady." "Your best?" Nia scoffed. "Your best is an insult. How can someone be this useless?" She stepped forward, shoving the basket out of Zuri's hands. The heavy yams tumbled to the ground, rolling in different directions. "Pick them up, you wretched thing." The king watched, his expression unreadable as Zuri quickly bent down, scrambling to gather the fallen yams. His eyes flickered from her to Kwame, who was nearby, quietly sweeping the courtyard. There was really something familiar about him. As the feast continued, the king found himself glancing in Kwame's direction again. That posture, that gait. It nagged at him, like a long-forgotten memory trying to claw its way back to the surface. He turned back to Chief Issa. "Tell me more about this boy. Where is he from?" Chief Issa waved dismissively. "Somewhere in the lowlands. He was abandoned as a child and raised by an old woman until she died." "He's nothing, your majesty. Just another mouth too poor to feed itself." The king hummed thoughtfully, but he said nothing. His fingers drummed against the armrest of his seat as he stared at Kwame once more. He didn't know why, but something about the boy unsettled him. Yet, he was quick to dismiss the thought, forgetting about Kwame in a minute and allowing himself to drink enough wine to his fill. The dim glow of the oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the mud walls of their small hut. The night air was cool, but Zuri felt a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with the weather. She nestled closer to Kwame, seeking comfort in the warmth of his embrace. "Why are they always so mean to us?" she murmured, her voice laced with frustration. Kwame sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Because they can," he said simply. "Because they have power and people like us have none." Zuri lifted her head to look at him. "But it's more than that, Kwame. Look at the Issas. They have more food than they can ever eat, yet they leave us to starve. Today, I saw their servants throwing away a whole basket of yams that had barely gone bad, but they wouldn't spare a single one for us." Kwame's jaw tightened. "That's how they are. They feast while we suffer. They grow fat while we struggle just to see another day." Zuri clenched her fists. "It's not fair. We work just as hard, harder even. But they take everything and we get nothing in return." Kwame exhaled deeply. "Fairness doesn't exist in this kingdom, Zuri. If it did, people like us wouldn't be sleeping hungry while Chief Issa's dogs eat better than we do." Zuri sat up, the anger burning in her eyes. "Today I saw Nia, his spoiled daughter, complaining that her roasted goat meat was too dry. She threw it on the floor and demanded another one. Meanwhile, we barely had enough to eat tonight." Kwame shook his head. "They don't see us as people, Zuri. To them, we are no better than the dirt beneath their feet. Zuri clenched her teeth. One day, Kwame, one day they will pay for this. The gods cannot let this injustice go on forever. Kwame gave her a small, sad smile. Perhaps. But for now, all we can do is survive. She sighed and rested her head against his chest again, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For now, they had nothing but each other. And in a world that showed them no kindness, that had to be enough. The day had finally arrived for a great celebration. Chief Issa's family, their eyes filled with pride and ambition, had organized a grand traditional marriage ceremony. They wanted to celebrate Nia's future union with the son of the king. The entire town was invited, and colorful banners, bright flowers, and sparkling decorations adorned every corner. Music filled the air. Chief Issa had even invited the most influential families from beyond the kingdom to witness his beloved daughter, Nia, marry the future king. At the center of the celebration, Nia stood dressed in a beautiful gown, glittering with jewels. She smiled arrogantly, convinced she was destined for a life of luxury. Her family boasted about how she would soon be married to someone very important, a future king. Her parents whispered to one another, their voices filled with pride and quiet cruelty, certain that this union would elevate them to even greater power in the kingdom. All around the square, stalls overflowed with delicious food and sweet treats. People danced joyfully to the rhythmic beats of the drums, while graceful performers twirled in traditional attire. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and cheer. Yet beneath the surface, a storm was waiting to break. Kwame and Zuri were also present, but not as guests. They had been forced to serve throughout the day, carrying heavy baskets and serving food. Kwame moved quietly among the crowd, his expression calm and kind despite the harsh words thrown at him by the arrogant guests. Little did anyone know, he carried a secret that would soon change everything. Just when it seemed that nothing could disrupt the celebration, Zuri, already exhausted and weak, accidentally tripped over one of the guests and fell to the ground. Chief Issa, furious at what he saw as an embarrassment, ordered his guards to roughly drag her away. From a short distance, Kwame watched with clenched fists as his wife was mistreated. Without hesitation, he rushed to her side, determined to help her up and leave. His actions caught the attention of the guests. Chief Issa and the wicked king were both enraged by the commotion. They decided to humiliate the couple further, forcing them to entertain the guests. Perhaps they should dance for us, the two men agreed, grinning wickedly. Kwame was dragged to the center of the square, and his shirt was torn from his back. The king, watching from his elevated seat, suddenly felt an eerie sense of familiarity. Something about Kwame unsettled him. As the guards taunted Kwame, jabbing their spears in his direction to force him to move in time with the drums, the king, his allies, and Chief Issa's family laughed in amusement. To them, this was the highlight of the celebration, a poor man being mocked for their entertainment. Zuri stood helplessly on the sidelines, hot tears streaming down her face. No one came to their aid. But why does he remind me of someone I know? The king muttered to Chief Issa, his brows furrowing. He is nobody, my king. Chief Issa began. My late brother. Yes, he reminds me of my late brother, the king interrupted, his voice tinged with sudden realization. Could this be his long-lost nephew? A cold wave of panic surged through Chief Issa at the thought. While the crowd remained fixated on the humiliation, a few members of the royal house noticed something on Kwame's shoulder. One of the kinsmen, an elderly man with a serious yet kind expression, stepped forward to take a closer look. He turned to his fellow elders and nodded in confirmation. The royal birthmark. A ripple of excitement spread through the late king's loyalists. They had long believed that identifying the true heir was the only way to dethrone the wicked king. The old man raised a hand, signaling the guards to stop. The drummers halted as well. Chief Issa sensed trouble. He glanced nervously at the king, who now looked deeply unsettled. In a strong, clear voice that carried through the hushed square, the old man declared, Friends, we gathered here today to celebrate the union of two families. But today, a long-hidden truth has come to light. He paused, allowing the suspense to build. The crowd leaned in, eager to hear more. The old man pointed at Kwame. "Look closely," he said, his voice steady. "You will see the mark of the true king on his shoulder." The guards stepped back in shock as they too noticed the mark for the first time. Gasps and murmurs spread like wildfire. Chief Issa's face darkened in disbelief. Could this really be true? Nia, who had spent her life believing she was destined for royalty, stood frozen in shock. The elder continued, "Kwame, the humble woodcutter, is the rightful heir to the throne, the one chosen by the gods to bring justice and hope to this kingdom." The wicked king sat motionless, his mind racing. He had the chance to kill the mark-bearer just weeks ago, but he had allowed Chief Issa to convince him that Kwame was a nobody. Now he was drowning in regret. He glanced around desperately, searching for a way to command the already confused guards into action. But the tide had shifted. The people, who had once mocked Kwame, now stared at him with new respect. The joyous celebration had turned into a moment of reckoning. The wicked king's family sat speechless, their carefully laid plans unraveling before their eyes. The future of the kingdom no longer belonged to them. Kwame stood in the middle of it all, staring at the mark on his shoulder. He had never understood its meaning before, but now everything was beginning to fall into place. He turned to Zuri, and for the first time that day she smiled, not out of relief but out of hope. In that moment, the focus of the celebration shifted. No longer was it about Nia's planned royal union. The true heir had been revealed, and with it, the kingdom's fate had changed forever. A new chapter had begun, one where justice, truth, and rightful leadership would rise from the humblest of beginnings. Chief Issa sat motionless, his fingers digging into the arms of his chair as the weight of the moment crashed down upon him. The great Chief Issa, the man who had built his influence on cruelty and oppression, was now watching his carefully laid plans crumble before his eyes. His daughter Nia, who had been dressed in the finest silks, ready to take her place as the future queen, stood frozen in place, her face drained of color. His wife, Amina, clutched his arm tightly, her nails sinking into his skin. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is a mistake. This cannot be happening." But it was happening. The truth stood before them, undeniable and absolute. Kwame, whom they had mocked, humiliated, and treated like filth, was now king. The realization burned through them like acid. Chief Issa clenched his jaw, his mind racing through every possibility, every scheme, every possible way to undo what had just been revealed. But there was none. The moment the elders confirmed Kwame's birthmark, the crowd had turned. The very people who had once laughed at him now bowed before him, their voices rising in cheers of praise. Amina turned to her husband, her eyes wild with desperation. "Say something. Do something. What do you expect me to do?" Chief Issa snapped, his voice low and sharp. His entire body was tense, his face contorted in rage. "The people have accepted him. The elders have spoken. The king is already helpless. What can I do?" Meanwhile, Nia stood trembling, her hands balled into fists at her sides. The dream she had been raised on, the dream of becoming queen, of ruling with power and luxury, was now dust. Her entire life had been shaped around the idea that she was destined for greatness. She had laughed at the unfortunate, sneered at the weak, and tormented those beneath her. Now she was the one being looked upon with pity. And worst of all, she would have to bow to Zuri. The girl she had humiliated, cursed, and cast away was now her queen. Nia's breath came in short, sharp gasps. She wanted to scream, to rage, to demand that someone fix this disaster, but even her own father had fallen silent. Her gaze darted to Zuri, who now stood beside Kwame, her posture regal despite the torn, worn-out fabric she still wore. Even in her simple state, she held more power than Nia ever would. Zuri met Nia's eyes, and for the first time there was no fear in them. For years, Nia had spat cruel words at her, dismissed her, treated her as less than nothing. But now, it was Nia who had to lower her gaze. Nia swallowed hard, her throat tightening as she realized the full weight of her fate. She had lost everything. And worse still, she had been the one to arrange it. It had been her father's wickedness, his need to control, his thirst for power, that had led to Zuri being forced into a marriage with Kwame. They had thought it was a punishment, a cruel fate meant to break her. But in doing so, they had unknowingly placed the future queen at the king's side. Cruel, bitter irony. Amina let out a choked sob, gripping her husband's arm. "We could have had everything," she whispered. "She could have had everything." Chief Issa did not reply. His fists clenched, his pride shattered. He had spent years oppressing the weak, believing himself untouchable. Now he would have to watch as the very people he had tormented ruled over him. The crowd roared in celebration, their voices rising in unison. "Long live the true king! Long live Queen Zuri!" Nia's knees buckled. She wished the ground could open up and swallow her up. A few days later, the people of the town gathered once again in the grand palace for a new celebration. This time the mood was different. The old plans had crumbled, and a fresh hope was in the air. It was the day when a new king and queen would be crowned, and no one could have guessed that the gentle, kind orphan, Zuri, would rise to sit beside the rightful king. Long ago, many had believed that Nia, the spoiled daughter of the wealthy Chief Issa, was meant to be the future queen. But as fate would have it, the truth had come to light during the marriage ceremony. With the revelation of Kwame's true identity as the rightful heir, the schemes that had once ruled the kingdom unraveled before everyone's eyes. Now, the kingdom was ready for new leadership, one built not on greed and cruelty, but on kindness and justice. On that day, as the sun rose and bathed the palace in warm golden light, the people gathered to witness the crowning of their new rulers. All eyes were on the grand throne as Kwame, once a humble woodcutter, now the rightful king, stepped forward to make an announcement that would change the kingdom forever. King Kwame, still humble despite his newfound status, spoke softly but clearly. "Today we restore balance to our land. We welcome a new era, one led not by greed but by fairness. And beside me, as my equal, as your queen, stands the woman who has shown the greatest strength, resilience, and kindness." His voice carried over the crowd like a steady wind, bringing a sense of renewal to the hearts of the people. The royal court, the elders, and even the common folk listened in silence, their anticipation thick in the air. Then, with a careful motion, King Kwame pointed to Zuri. She stood quietly, her posture graceful, her eyes filled with both sorrow from the past and a spark of hope for the future. The mark of hardship that had once defined her life was now replaced by the glow of dignity and strength. In that moment, the people no longer saw the fragile girl they once pitied but a woman ready to lead with wisdom and love. The coronation ceremony was held in the great hall, its walls decorated with bright banners and fresh flowers. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the sound of soft music filled the space. The murmurs of the crowd, all celebrating this new beginning, blended into a hopeful song of unity. As Kwame stepped forward, the royal elder placed a golden crown upon his head, the mark of his rightful place as king. The weight of it was not just metal but responsibility, a duty he had unknowingly been born to bear. The people erupted into cheers, their voices carrying the echoes of justice restored. Then, as tradition dictated, he turned to his queen. With steady hands, King Kwame placed a delicate jewel-encrusted crown on Zuri's head. It shimmered in the light, a symbol of justice, love, and the promise of a fairer kingdom. At that moment, Chief Issa, his wife, and Nia, once the rulers of Zuri's misery, were forced to bow low. The same family that had once tormented her, forced her into marriage as an act of cruelty, and laughed at her misfortune now had to kneel before her in submission. Their faces, which had once been filled with arrogance, were now hollow with regret and humiliation. Their power had crumbled. Their greed had cost them everything. Zuri, with a gentle smile and a heart full of forgiveness, looked upon them not with triumph, but with understanding. She could have sought revenge. She could have ordered their punishment. But she chose instead to rise above the darkness they had once cast upon her. King Kwame, standing beside her with his wise, knowing eyes, echoed her heart's decision. "Let us not dwell on the past with bitterness," he said softly. "Instead, let us build a kingdom where kindness reigns, where justice prevails, and where every person, no matter their past, has a chance to do better." The chief and his family lowered their heads, accepting their new roles with heavy hearts. They had no choice but to serve the rulers they had once despised. The people in the hall felt a sense of relief and joy, for this change marked the beginning of a new era, a time when love and justice would guide the land. As the ceremony ended, the entire kingdom erupted into celebration. Music and laughter filled the streets. Children danced in circles, and the elders told stories of renewal and hope. The once divided hearts of the people now beat as one, united under the rule of King Kwame and Queen Zuri. In that beautiful moment, it became clear that true leadership did not come from wealth or inheritance, but from character, kindness, and the courage to lead with love. And so, a new chapter began. A chapter where justice and unity reigned, and where every heart could find hope and a place to belong.